Hello and welcome to the Craft Beer Corner. For today's beer review, we're jumping into only the second beer from a specific brewer that I've ever had. Today we are jumping over to Mother Earth Brew Company. This specific beer is called Four Seasons and it is a bourbon barrel aged barley wine. This one clocks in at 12.1% ABV. Mother Earth Brew Co. is based in Nampa, Idaho, though I did catch on the back of this can it says they also have a location in Vista, California now. So I don't know which location at which this beer was brewed. Doesn't really matter, but Nampa, Idaho is home base, and they also have a facility in Vista, California. So label art, not too much to talk about really, just yellow and green, or gold and green. Looks like the colors of my alma mater. Quite nice. And it's a nice barley wine here, so I think we're going to be in for a treat. I believe the first beer I had from them was a stout of some kind. So I'll be curious to see what their barley wine game is like, and a bourbon barrel aged version at that. So let's get this poured. We're going to use our stout glass today. Here we go. Here's a barley wine that is much more in the normal color range. They're not always this color. Some are darker, some are lighter, some are even pitch black. There is such a thing as a black barley wine. I've had one. It was delicious. All right, so we're not going to quite pour the whole can in there. But visually, yeah, this is that classic caramel color of a barley wine. This one's very active in terms of carbonation. It's got a very pungent aroma coming off of it. I could smell it as soon as I started pouring it. It did form a pretty nice head. Pretty active in that carbonation, so I don't know how long this head is going to stick around, if we'll have any cling or residual pad on top, but it looks great. And I'm already getting the bourbon and the classic barley wine's aroma from a foot and a half away. Let's get right up on it and see what it's about. Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a lot of bourbon coming off of there. I'm also picking up very clearly a lot of caramel and toffee. This one actually smells a little sweeter. It's kind of presenting more caramel notes coming through. There's still that definite richness of the underlying dark fruit, but it almost smells like candied versions of them. So like candied plums, candied figs. I'm getting that quite strongly. The other thing about this beer is, and they don't say that they brewed it with pecans or added pecans, but they say with natural pecan flavoring. So I'm guessing that's from a naturally derived extract. So we'll see. But bourbon barrel aged, pecan, barley wine. Let's jump right in, see what this one's about. Head did settle down. It does have a nice little pad and some good cling. So let's just jump in. Take one. Ooh. Oh man. That's really good. Okay, so there's a lot happening in this flavor profile. The first thing that I got when I swallowed was this rush of that bourbon barrel. Comes very, very big up front, and then just massive notes of that pecan. What a great flavoring additive into a barley wine. Due to the natural flavor tendencies of this beer style, pecan is a very good choice to pair with it. And it works beautifully in this. So there's this big burst of bourbon, you get this big burst of pecan, and then it starts to open up into the classic underlying barley wine flavors that you would come to know and expect. There is indeed a lot of toffee and caramel. This beer smelled kind of candied versions and sweeter on the nose. It doesn't come off that way at all in the flavor profile. This is not a sweet tasting beer at all. And indeed, it's kind of the flip-flop of the toffee caramel we got on the nose. The toffee notes in the flavor profile are a lot more dominant than the caramel notes, and there's nothing about it that tastes like sweetened, like less caramelized versions of sugar. So I'm getting a lot of richness. In this one, there is a good bit of fruit that comes through as well. And this beer, it's kind of interesting because the pecan is such a driving factor. It's kind of pulling all the depth and the richness of it into the flavor profile as kind of the dominant forces. So there is definite plum, there's definite fig, but the fig is kind of playing the more central stage of kind of the classic fruit that you would normally expect in a barley wine, and it's really binding strongly to that pecan, which is still just kind of running around, muddling and mixing with this kind of bourbon barrel that's on here. The bourbon barrel in this one is not really giving off too many intensities of a booziness, but there was a very distinct kind of vanilla vibe that's coming off of it. So you're getting these very bourbony and vanilla-like mixes of toffee and fig and caramel, and it's really, really nice. It's very, very rich. It's big, bold. It's got a big punch of flavor that hits you up front. So before we jump into for our second taste and kind of explore where this finish is going, there's a lot happening in this beer. There's a lot of complex layering of flavor. That is absolutely for certain. But first, let's talk texture. On sip one, I didn't particularly think that the body felt super heavy. 12%, that's still a high ABV. On the barley wine end of things, it's maybe on the low average end. Typically 13, 14 is kind of getting in the Goldilocks zone, maybe 12. But it seems like most of the barley wines I've had in the last couple of years, they've gotten ever higher and higher in their ABVs. So 13, 14, 15%. So be that as it may, 12% is not a low ABV by any stretch of the imagination, even for a barley wine. But on this one, the way that I expected it to feel, it's not quite as heavy as I anticipated. It felt medium heavy maybe. I'll see if that rings true on second sip when my brain isn't having to process so much brand new information on a new beer. But it didn't feel oppressively heavy at all. In terms of the mouthfeel, this one did not feel quite as resistant as your average barley wine either. Though it did get quite creamy when you agitate it around the palate. So it did add this sensation of thickness, but it didn't feel super resistant. So a lot of data to take in. A very delicious beer, my first impression. I'm going to jump back in for a second sip. I'm going to pay attention to the texture first, and then we're going to let everything re-intensify, see if there's anything I missed. Then we're going to talk about this finish. But this is a really, really good barley wine. Pecan is a great added flavor to mix with a barley wine. Tasty, tasty beer indeed. That's really just medium heavy. You get that immediate burst of the bourbon. Big, intense. It's just poof, there's bourbon. Pecan takes about 2-3 seconds, and then it really starts to make itself known. And then it's really equal parts bourbon barrel, equal parts pecan, and a lot of those vanilla notes of the bourbon barrel start to come out, and then they're mixing with the pecan, and it's absolutely delicious. Comes about the 10-second mark. That's when the richness of the underlying toffee and caramel flavors really start to open up. That's when the darker fruit characters really start to open up. On second sip, I'm getting a lot more plum than I got on the first sip, and it's really, really nice. The fig is also still quite prominent, and it's really binding with that pecan. So this is a big, rich, bold beer with a lot of layers of flavor that are kind of intertwining and ebbing and flowing in and out of one another. Really, really delicious. You often get flavors of raisin on barley wines. This one has a little bit. It kind of hits the residual on the decline of the intensity of the flavor profile. That's when a little bit of raisin pops in. To me, it tastes like red grape raisins, not white. It's a little richer, but it's really, really delicious. Now, the thing on this beer that I find surprising is despite its barrel aging and the intensity of the flavors up front, on the finish, it's not as intense. It still lasts almost as long as you would expect a barrel-aged barley wine to, but the intensity of the flavor that lingers on the palate is not quite there. So I think part of that might be coming to its, compared to a normal barley wine, relative lack of viscosity and weight. So it's not quite as thick. It's not doing as much coating of the palate, but it's definitely still there. Make no mistake, this is a longer than average finish for a barley wine. It is barrel aged, so that's really helping to push it out. Where it does finish on this one is very, very clear. It is bourbon barrel dominant, about 75%, and residual bits of pecan flavor, about 25%. So it's really the barrel that dominates the length of the finish on the back end, in tandem with the pecan, just as this nice little added bonus, little vestiges of residual pecan that are floating with and mixing with it. And a lot of that vanilla character from the bourbon barrel is really quite prominent on the end of the finish as well. And like I said, it's there, it's got the length, it's just not quite as intense as you might expect on the end of a finish for a big barrel-aged barley wine. But absolutely delicious beer. This is another great beer from Mother Earth Brew Co. Absolutely delicious. I really, really like the pecan idea in this beer style. It absolutely works. And part of my brain is now thinking, well, if somebody did pecan in this one, I wonder if anybody's done a hazelnut. I think that too would pair well, maybe in particularly a black barley wine variant. And if you barrel age it on top, good Lord. Nonetheless, I'm getting away from myself. At day's end, absolutely delicious beer. This is the second beer I've had from this brewer, just as good as the first one I enjoyed. Really, really nice barley wine. Clever new kind of twist to take it, and I definitely am a fan. I'm going to take my time, sip on this beer, count my scores. When we come back, we'll get this one ranked from top to bottom. All right, now that we've gotten to enjoy this beer, we're going to get it ranked. This was Mother Earth Brew Co.'s Four Seasons, a bourbon barrel-aged barley wine, clocking in at 12.1% ABV, and it did have added natural pecan flavors. Mother Earth Brewing Company, maybe they're based in Ohio, maybe in California, but they do have two separate locations. It did mention both Vista, California, and I forget where else for the other one, Nampa, Idaho. I think the first beer I tried from them said specifically it was brewed at the Nampa facility. This one could be Vista. Maybe home base is in California. I'm not sure, but nonetheless, we're going to go through, get this one ranked. Typical barley wine fashion, especially for barrel aged, the aroma on this was absolutely massive. The bourbon really, really came through. On this one, you could smell a lot of the underlying toffee and caramel aromas. And indeed, on the nose on this one, it actually smelled slightly sweeter than your average. So maybe more lightly caramelized sugars, leaning more on the caramel end of the spectrum than the toffee end. But it smelled really, really nice. You could also pick up some of the underlying richness of the dark fruit, though in this one it did smell rather like candied versions of them. But absolutely fantastic. A wonderful aroma, hugely pungent. Aroma gets a 10 out of 10. For the taste, this was a delicious barley wine. Very much classic barley wine, but that pecan edition was a very unique, interesting, and for my money, really, really smart twist to put on this beer style. The flavor of a pecan just pairs so well with the natural flavors that come out in a barley wine. I'm kind of surprised this is the first one I've ever seen with that. It worked beautifully together. And even though it smelled a little sweeter on the nose, had almost candied versions of the fruit and the lighter side of the caramel, less toffee in the aroma, on the taste it was almost the opposite. So what you smelled was not exactly what you got. It was a lot richer, very deep toffee flavors that came through. Still some caramel, but the fruit really tasted almost like if you were to make a toffee fruit cobbler. That's kind of like the vibe I was getting off of this thing. And it was absolutely fantastic. And then the barrel aging, the pecans, an added bonus. Taste gets a 10 out of 10. For the body. The body on this one was nowhere near as heavy and big as I expect on a 12% barley wine. It was really just high end of average. Body gets a 6 out of 10. For the mouthfeel. Similar story here. It wasn't anywhere nearly as resistant as you expect on this style in this ABV range. Again, it was really just high end of average. Mouthfeel gets a 6 out of 10 as well. For the finish, very, very long finish on this beer. So the overall actual pungency of the lingering flavors was not quite as large as you normally get on a barrel-aged barley wine, but it still lasted just as long. It was really, really nice. And you were left over with just this nice residual pecan and barrel kind of lingering on the back of the palate, and it really was a long finish. finish, it's a 10 out of 10. For the head and retention, this one did a really great job. Barley wines tend to be very active in terms of carbonation. They're kind of all over the board with the heads that they form, how well they retain. This one, really, really great job, especially if you poured at home. Head and retention gets a 9 out of 10. For the appearance, this was that textbook kind of caramel color, which is the norm for a barley wine. Perfect 10 out of 10. For the balance on this beer was exceptional. Whatever barrel they used, the length of time they left it in there, absolutely nailed it. The balance of ingredients, the malts, the yeast, it was all right. And that pecan addition would have been easy to go overboard. And they used a pretty heavy hand, but it paired so well in this beer. I don't think I would have tweaked a thing about it. I think they absolutely nailed the balance. Balance, perfect 10 out of 10. Feeling in the intangibles, subjectively, I loved it. I love barley wine, my favorite beer style. This was a very, very good version. I drank a fair bit of barrel aged, but never had one with pecans added, and it was fantastic. Subjectively, 10 out of 10. Finally, as an example of its style, overall this beer did very, very well. Really lost points, notably in body and mouthfeel. It did deviate from the norm, but everything else, it did, either perfect score or only lost 1 point and barely. In the grand scheme of things, I think this is a top tier barley wine. Only docked 1 point. Example of the style gets a 9 out of 10, which does bring the total score on Mother Earth Brew Co.'s 4 seasons to a 90 out of 100. So this is just another top tier barley wine, guys. A very unique one with that pecan addition. I was surprised at how big of a role and how big of a difference that single ingredient made. And this just keeps bringing me back to the same thing I've been talking about for weeks and weeks and weeks now in reviews, is this clever, kind of play that brewers are doing where they'll take a beer and just tweak one little thing. That's not what happened here, I don't believe. But the difference in all the other barley wines typically that you find is that pecan. And it does make a huge difference, and it really changes the beer, and I absolutely loved it. If you're a fan of barley wines, barrel-aged barley wines, or really pecans in general, I think this is one that's worth your time. Absolutely worth seeking. I know they do a lot of different beer styles and things with their 4 seasons that they release during the various seasons of the year, but had to grab this one as a barley wine. I absolutely loved it. I do highly recommend. Folks, that's today's review. As always, I do sincerely appreciate you tuning in today. Please don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And if you want to stay in the loop when our videos go live, just turn on your notifications, hit that bell icon. It's right next to the subscribe button. Until next time, keep it beer, keep it craft. We'll see you on the next one. Cheers.